Hi there, YouTubers. Grandpa Bob here. This is my very first video on YouTube, so I'm going to be making a lot of mistakes, and I beg your indulgence. I'm an old fella. You can't live for more than 3/4 of a century and not have some stories to tell. I've got some stories to tell. My grandchildren used to love to have me tell them stories, and my children, and they're all grown up now and gone. So they suggested that I tell my stories for YouTube. So here I am. I guess if you want to be offended, I'll probably offend you. Because I'm going to mention the good Lord Jesus sometimes, and if you're offended by that, why, it would be a good thing probably for you to find another channel. And I might say something that's not politically correct. And again, if you are very sensitive to that, why, it's probably better that you find another channel. I guess I look around and I see how things are now and how they used to be. And I think about the times of the past, how much they've changed, how everything from our telephones to our entertainment, everything has changed so much since I was young. For example, I was looking at my cell phone today and thinking about the old days when we used to have telephones with cranks on them. Now these telephones were usually on the wall. Most people, poor people like we were, had the telephone on the wall. And the telephone was a big wooden box with a microphone coming out the front and a listening device hanging on the side of the telephone. You would pick up the listening device, stick it up to your ear, and then you would ring the telephone. Now if you were calling long distance, you had to turn that crank about a dozen times to get the operator on the line. The operator would come on the line and she would say, for example, I live in Maitland, Missouri. She would say, "Maitland, how can I help you?" And you would say, "Okay, Ruth," because you knew the name of the operator, because she'd been operator there for a long time. You'd say, "Ruth, I need to talk to Joe Smith in St. Joseph, Missouri." "Okay, Bob, I'll get them for you." So they would call, the operator would call from Maitland. She would get a hold of the operator in Oregon and ask to be connected to Savannah. Then the operator in Oregon would connect her to Savannah. And when she got the operator in Savannah, she would ask to talk to the operator in St. Joseph, Missouri. So the operator in Savannah would then connect her to the operator in St. Joe, Missouri. When she got the operator in St. Joe, Missouri, she would say, "I need to talk to Joe Smith at telephone number 1789. Well, then that operator would try to call 1789. And when they got the person on the line, the operator in St. Joe would tell the operator, "Your party is on the line." So then the operator locally would tell you, "Okay, Bob, your call has been placed through to St. Joe, to John Smith or whoever, and you can go ahead and talk now." Well, you couldn't just talk because it was a battery-powered telephone hanging on the wall. It had a battery about this tall and about this big around, two of them usually inside the telephone, and that powered the telephone. So you would have to yell into the phone, and you would yell at the top of your voice, "Hey John, how you doing?" You know, and then he would yell at the top of his voice back. And that's how you communicated. You just couldn't dial a number on your phone. That's how you call long distance. But it was very nice in a way, because in those days the operator was your friend usually, and she knew all about you. And you was also on what was called a party line. Now, out in the country where I lived, everybody was on a party line. There might be as many as 7 or 8 different people on the same telephone line. And when you would get a call, you would hear receivers being put up and put to their ear. Everybody was listening to your telephone call. So you had to be very careful what you said on the telephone, because everybody was listening. And like, for example, if you wanted to call somebody on the line, on the same line, let's say your neighbor, each one of you had a different call. Now, Leo's call might be a long ring, and then a short ring, and then a long ring, and a long ring. That would alert him that somebody wanted to talk to him on his telephone, so he'd pick up the phone. If you wanted to talk to somebody else on the line, their ring might be a long, long, short. So you'd dial long, you would turn that crank several times, long, long, short. Then they would know that was their ring. Our particular ring was a long, short, long. Somebody would turn the crank on their telephone a lot of times, and then do it short, and then long. And that's how we knew that somebody was trying to call us. Or if the operator was trying to call us with a long distance call, or somebody on a different line, it would be the operator trying to dial us. So the telephone system back then was a lot different than it is now. But the local telephone operator was also your answering service. I would come home from school, and my mom and dad both worked, and I would tell Ruth, did Mom or Dad leave me any messages? Ruth, the operator, would say, okay, Bob, your mom said that your meal is in the refrigerator at the right-hand corner of the refrigerator, and she told me to tell you that. Okay, Ruth, thank you. Now, they had on the telephone systems back in those days, they were also your warning system. I'll never forget, a tornado was coming towards our town one time, and the telephone was ring, 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 and everybody answered the telephone, hello, 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 hello. And then Ruth said, there is a tornado headed towards Maitland. Everybody take cover. A tornado is headed towards Maitland. Well, that was our warning system back in those days. And it worked. If somebody had a house fire and they needed help fighting the house fire, your telephone would ring, 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 and that would, you'd get on the telephone and they'd say, well, so-and-so's house is on fire and they need their neighbors to come help them. So everybody would go to the fire and try to help fight the fire. So there was a lot of good things about those old systems. They had a lot of bad things. You had to scream on the telephone in order to be able to be heard a lot of times, but you had a service, a love of your neighbors, and the telephone operator took care of everybody. If you were sick, you would give one long ring, and that would get the telephone operator. Now, when you turned that crank, it was ringing the phones, and the longer you turned that crank, the longer the ring was. So anyway, if you were sick and you needed a doctor and you needed help fast, you'd ring the operator. Ruth would get on there. This is Ruth. What can I do for you? And you'd say, Ruth, I'm awfully sick. I need the doctor to come. Well, in those days, it's not like now. The doctor would come to your house. They did house calls. If you was real sick and the doctor needed to come see you, he would drive all the way. Like our doctor was a doctor by the name of Dr. Perry, and he was in Mound City, Missouri. he would drive all the way from Mound City to our house to treat somebody with the flu, or in my father's case one time, he ate a bunch of turnips and didn't chew them, and it made him really sick, so he called the doctor, and the doctor came and made him well. And old Dr. Perry, you'd watch on the highway when here would come this big old black sedan, and he'd be driving up to your house, and a lot of time he'd say, well, Doc, I hate to ask you to come all the way to my place, but I'm awfully sick. He'd say, well, I want to come to your place. He said, sick people should not be out in the weather. So it's my job to come to your house, because I don't want to see sick people out in the weather getting sicker. That's why I come to your house. But of course, that's a thing of the past. There is no such thing as a house call now. No matter how sick you are, you get in your car, whether it's raining or whatever, and you get in your car and you go to their waiting room, and you sit in their waiting room with a dozen other sick people getting sicker, catching what they got, and there's no such thing as a house call now. But those were good days. People loved each other more. People went to church. People believed in Jesus. They believed in the love of Jesus. And the love of Jesus teaches you to love other people. And so people loved each other more. Nowadays, there's not much love. It seems like everybody's after a dollar. The motto now is do unto others before they do unto you, instead of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So, yeah, it's a lot different. The cars were a lot different. We had an old car that you had to turn a crank to start the car. Everything was cranks. Telephone had a crank. Cars had a crank. You would grind corn for the animals, and you turned a crank. Everything had a crank in it in those days. There weren't many electrical powered things. And you'd go outside and you'd be careful when you was turning the crank of that car, because you would turn that crank at the front of the car, and sometimes the car would backfire and reverse the crank, and if you had a hold of it real strong, it could break your arm. But you turned that crank and turned it until the car would start, and you had to set things on your dashboard, spark adjusters and all that good thing. Of course, we had an old car. It was an old used car with sideboard runners, and Dad would go out and start that car, and sometimes when I got a little bit older, he'd let me start it. But we would go down the road with that old car. We went to Mound City to the movies every Saturday night. They would send us a handbill with all the movies on it for a month, and we would pick out the movies we wanted to see, and then every Saturday night just about we'd go to Mound City to the movies. Movies were a quarter, popcorn was a nickel, and as we was going down the road, there'd be a hitchhiker along the road, and Dad would stop, and the hitchhiker would climb up on the side of the car, which they had in those days, so it's called a running board, on the side of the car down below, and you could stand on that running board and hold on to the top of the car, and Dad would scoot on down the highway about 50 miles an hour with some guy standing on the sideboard hanging onto the top of the car, and when he got to where he wanted to get off, he'd tap on the top of the car, and Dad would stop, and he'd climb off, and we'd go on. But those times were happy times. People treated each other well. You had a lot of respect for other people. You had a Christian morality. In the Bible, Jesus teaches you to treat other people well and to love other people and to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And another thing Jesus taught was refuse to do wrong. And if people would remember that today, refuse to do wrong, they'd be a lot better off. They wouldn't get themselves in trouble. They wouldn't get themselves hooked on drugs or alcohol, and they would be better off. Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you, and refuse to do wrong. Those are basically what the whole Bible is about. Jesus is full of love, and he loved everybody. He still loves everybody, and it would be good if we would love him back and treat each other like he likes us to treat each other, and that is good. But this is going to be the first of my films. I'm going to tell stories about things I've seen in my life. Some of them are pretty hairy. I was a police officer. I was a old-time radio announcer. I worked my way through high school as a radio announcer as a kid. And I was a newsman back in those days. I've seen a lot of things. I know a lot of stories. So I hope I don't bore you to death. But anyway, thank you for watching, and God bless you all. Goodbye. See you next video.